Thank you for joining us, and also for everybody who is going to watch the broadcast of this session. That I think is going to be much broader audience. But I also want to say I'm very surprised on how many people came to this conference from all over the world to share knowledge, to discuss the pressing matters of architecture, of society. And I think that today we're going to have a conversation that is very aligned with these themes that we're seeing throughout the conference. I'm David Basulto. I'm an architect from Chile. I'm a founder and editor-in-chief of ArchDaily. And today, to talk about home in this next-gen session, I'm being joined by Lara Ann Blasberg, a sustainability specialist at IKEA, Henry Glogau, architect and circular design specialist at 3XN, GXN here in Copenhagen. Claire Kimball Johnson from CKJ Architects, her own firm, also based here in Copenhagen. Alexander Kucheravi, a Ukrainian architect from Active House, Ukraine. And by Christine Collins, business unit manager, sustainability at Sueco, a background in structural engineering and helping architects to realize their ideas. So why home? Why home? We have houses, singular houses, low density housing, big density, high density housing. But the home is something special. Happens inside the house, but it's something that shapes our life, and it's something where we as inhabitants try to find our expression. It's a place that is given by us, by an architect, by a contractor, but immediately we make it ours. We choose our own colors, we choose our own furniture, and it is a representation of our identity, of our family. But it's sometimes something that is distant for homeowners. The relation with an architect is not something that everybody can afford. Not everybody can afford a singular house. Many of these things are just a given. But more and more and more, and we're seeing this through our internet data, trend analysis, people want to engage with architecture, want to be an active participant on shaping their homes. And I think that this is a tremendous opportunity for us as architects to be closer to the humans, closer to the inhabitants. So today, I think that all of you have a saying on this from your very different and diverse points of view. So we're going to talk about the housing. But first, I want to ask you to introduce yourselves so you can share with us what are you doing in your own positions, in your own companies that is connected with this. And I want to start with Lara.
Yes, thank you so much, David. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm Lara Blasberg. I'm a sustainability specialist for the customer meeting points. You could call them also stores at IKEA. And my closeness to this topic has to do with the work on developing standards and guidelines to be able to implement sustainability around the whole world. And this is really the challenge of having scalable solutions while also being able to localize and personalize those solutions, and doing so in a way that really engages community and respects planetary boundaries beyond carbon emissions, but also with such topics as biodiversity and water systems. So it's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Lara. Henry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Henry Glogau. I'm an architect and a circular design specialist at a firm here in Copenhagen called GXN, which is a research and innovation company which is attached to the architecture firm 3XN. At GXN, we are very much a company that takes research and implements it into practice. And one of the two of the key frameworks that we work within is around circular design and carbon analysis. Very much understanding how we can look at a transformation type of architecture, thinking about how we can evolve and change through circularity to respond to many of the current and future global challenges. So we have a team of engineers and specialists in that. But on the other side, we have very much, we look at it from a behavioral center view perspective through our team with behavioral analysis psychologists and anthropologists. We look at how behavioral design can help have a big impact on the way that we live also from a physiological but also psychological background. A little bit on the side from work, I also spend a lot of time working in architecture in extreme environments based in areas of the world such as South America and Greenland and the Middle East, where we start to look at a different type of living environment, informal settlement communities, this growing urban informality, and how our architecture of the future also needs to very much accommodate that type of living. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for joining.
Thank you, Henry. Claire?
I'm Claire Kimmel-Johnson. I'm an architect and a strategist. I'm based currently in Italy, but I did my studies in the United States and France and ended here in Denmark with a master's in strategic design and entrepreneurship for architecture from the Royal Danish Academy and Copenhagen Business School. And I had the opportunity to share my master's research at a number of conferences with Active House, as well as with VELUX at their Built for Life conference, which was looking into how we can encourage holistic, sustainable renovations of residential properties, looking at both certifications, but then also guidelines, helping architects communicate sustainability with the end users, with their clients. And I have my own studio. I work specifically with renovation, mostly with private homeowners, but also with small-scale hospitality. And my projects, they always try to involve the end user, really trying to figure out what are they looking for in sustainability, trying to create holistic sustainability, not only the energy and the environmental transformation, but also the social factors, also the economic, looking if there's really a return on investment for clients. Is there a lifetime cost analysis? Because that's what clients are looking for. They're thinking about their finances. They're thinking about aesthetic choices. How can we architects help people change their priorities from aesthetics to sustainability? And I also actually help run a small boutique hotel on Lago Maggiore with my husband and my brother-in-law. But it's been a great way to have contact with people of different ages and from different places. Talk with them about what do they think of sustainability? What do they think about homes? How can they incorporate it in their daily lives?
Perfect. Thank you, Claire. Alexander?
Yep. So my name is Alexander Kucheryavi. Firstly, I'm an architect. But I was so active with Active House approach in Active House Alliance that became an president of Active House Ukraine. And it gave me opportunity to share the knowledge and approach to more wide people with my colleagues, with my clients. And my mission for today, mission and passion, is green, healthy, and sustainable recovery of Ukraine. And from my point of view, Active House is the best approach to make it fast, with high level of quality, and it's real right time for this. It's the right time for this.
Thank you, Alexander. Christine?
Yes. Hi, my name is Christine Collin, and as you said, I'm a structural engineer, so I may be the odd one out here in this panel. But I specialized in life cycle assessments for buildings and building materials, so calculating the CO2 emissions of the buildings that we are building. And I've been working within this field for the last 7 years in Bramble, and now lastly here in Sweco, where I've been for the past 2 years, managing a sustainability team and expanding from 10 to 47 people. So really expanding the knowledge that we have and being able to use this knowledge for even more projects. So some of the things that we do are doing these life cycle assessments for new buildings that are being built specifically or especially here in Denmark, where we have new regulation, which means we must conduct these type of assessments. But not only conduct them at the end, but really try to do these assessments during the early stages of design to inform the design decisions. So, for example, helping out the architects choosing between different facades, not only looking at aesthetics or cost, but also including CO2 emissions and other environmental impacts. Could also be something like biodiversity, which we're looking very much into now. Yeah, so that was a bit about me.
Perfect, thank you. Well, I think that as society, we try to be very conscious on what is happening on the world. We understand that we need to be much more efficient in terms of energy use. We need to reduce our footprint. We need to recycle. We need to be more healthy. And we do this in our day-to-day through many ways. But I wonder how these aspirations are finding their way into how we are shaping our houses. As in the same way that we decide to buy a heater or one or another, we look at its performance. Or when we're buying a phone, we're also looking at its performance. Do we look for these things when we're buying a house? Do we look on how much we can make it ours? Do we look into the footprint of its materials? Or even if this material in the long run is something that can affect my health? So as you can see, our guests come from very diverse backgrounds, and I want to start the conversation asking from your different windows, how do you see that these aspirations and models or parameters that are coming from our society are shaping homes today? And I want to start with you, Lara.
Thank you so much. I would say that first and foremost, one of the key elements of being able to shape different dimensions of sustainability in the home is having a sense of ownership over it. And I'm originally from Los Angeles, so I grew up in the 1980s in an era of tract housing, so to speak, where it's literally cookie-cutter houses all across the hillside. And maybe you could choose among 3 or 4 different models, but there wasn't really a way of having a home that was reflecting your personality, your family, your lifestyle. And this is what we see is changing around the world, is that people want to live in places that reflect who they are. And they don't necessarily feel that what is put out there in social media, the general media, or even necessarily when they're house shopping is reflecting that sense of self. In Denmark, I found it maybe a little bit different, and that's in part because of the role of history and the role of the government, creating schemes to enable scaling, changing the home space with some of these solutions, whether that was about the recent subsidy the government had to enable you to take tax deductions if you had a carpenter come and do work on your home, or in the recent energy crisis when the government made a subsidy for you to be able to change the form of energy that was heating or cooling your home. And in this, I feel it's a different engagement because you can have a fondness and a relationship with old buildings and understand that you're in a society that's going to help you have that sense of belonging and enable you to make the changes to those buildings in a way that makes them more sustainable, while also having that history and developing that sense of self there. I would also just add that if any of you didn't know, that IKEA every year is releasing a Life at Home report. This is interviewing some 37,000 people from around the world in around 35 different countries to understand what is really the need and the desire at home. And it's very much reflecting this, that people want to see themselves reflected and that there's a struggle today to see that manifest. Also with sustainability, to have the space that you need to bring greenery into your home world, to be able to store things properly, to have reflections of LGBTQ+, and to really have all of those dimensions reflected in the design that is offered to you or made available to you through home renovations.
Perfect. And how do you see this, Henry?
Yeah, I think actually just building on some of the points you mentioned there around this idea of personalization and customization to your needs. I think we've been at GXN been looking at this topic for the last few years through an EU-funded project called Circuit, and I think that what we've been doing there is we've been analyzing the existing homes and the way that we've been designing both historically, but also what we're designing in the future. And if we look in the Copenhagen context with a huge portion of apartment-style living, we're heading in the direction where we're making the same mistakes. We're creating a rigid form of architecture which is not learning from our previously precast, rigid, unagile design, which doesn't allow for that future-proofing. It doesn't allow for that, the changing needs and dynamics that we have, both from the diverse settings that we lead. Everyone lives a very different life, different cultural backgrounds, different societal and family dynamics. So what kind of is a big focus with us at GXN at the moment is how do we not make those same mistakes? How do we look at, from an architectural tectonic point of view, both our existing infrastructure but also our future infrastructure? So that's, I guess, one of the parameters that we're we're very focused on at the moment.
Perfect. And for you, Claire, which are these pressing forces or trends that you see shaping the home?
Well, I think that sustainability is becoming much more of the mainstream for homeowners, which is great. We went through the Corona crisis where people were spending so much time in their homes, so people started thinking about the functionality of their spaces, also about indoor climate. And then now with the energy crisis, it's impossible for people to ignore their energy bills. So people are starting to really realize that sustainability is a major part of their homes. They have to think about it. But the problem is that there's such a big barrier of economics. To do these deep energy renovations that people are sort of starting to understand now, they're interested in them, but they don't have the funds to do it. And even if they do have the funds to do it, they're also often finding that there's no return on investment. They can invest a huge amount of money in an energy transformation, but for that energy transformation to happen, you might have to do structural changes. You probably want to put in your aesthetic changes. You want to renovate your second, third bathroom. And the problem is that people invest all this money, but then the market price isn't actually going up. So while people are very interested in sustainability, integrating it into their homes, they don't have the affordable solutions to do it. And it's a big problem. It really needs to be taken on by big companies, by more public policy, because people can't integrate sustainability into their homes unless they actually have the means to do so.
Perfect. I take this concept and later I'm going to ask you a specific question. And for you, Alexander, from these changes in society, these needs, what do you think is shaping the home today?
I think that today problems shape our architecture and our approach, how we solve their problems. And architects responsible for this. And I can compare us with the doctors, because when you are ill, you are going to the doctor. Of course, you can go to the shaman and try to believe him that you will survive with your disease. But architecture today should solve the problems. Unfortunately, still, we are creating a lot. Problems more. And for example, if you compare different approaches in the world and compare, for example, Europe, North and South, I don't want to tell about the particular countries, but for example, in many countries, people and architects compete with the sizes of their buildings. And I hope one day we will compete with the senses of our buildings. And Active House is a holistic approach, and I found a lot of answers in this approach for myself. And I understood that I can solve the problems for today. I can satisfy my clients with his needs. I can impress him not only about my talent, intuition, and my vision of architecture, but I can also impress him about the objective parameters. And Active House is evidence-based architecture which solves the problems. Because do you know that daylight, thermal environment, acoustic parameters, and indoor quality influence 49% of learning performance of students in the schools? It's Active House approach. And how much energy do we need for this? It's the second question, and we can also answer for this. And today we are sitting in the shape of living places. It's a first realized building which reach 3.5 kilograms per square meter. It's our responsibility today before nature, because our clients don't take care about this yet. Because for them, it's somewhere after. It will be yesterday. But we can see climate change today already in different countries. And I think that problems and our way of solving these problems shaping our architecture.
Later, I will take this analogy that you did at the beginning with the doctor, but interesting to see that here we have different, let's say, perceptions, because of course, different clients, different markets. And for you, Christine, which are these forces that are shaping the home?
We see one big trend among many, of course, but that is having these shared spaces in new buildings. It can be in apartment blocks, having shared spaces, but we also see a lot of buildings being built outside of the bigger cities for especially senior citizens, which I think is great. So what we are trying to achieve, I guess, like on a larger scale is that we have all these senior citizens living in very big housing in the suburbs around the big cities. So they are living maybe 1 or 2 people in 180, 200 square meters, taking up a lot of space. And so what are being offered to them now is shared senior spaces that are very attractive in terms of sustainability, in terms of having a lot of shared opportunities. You can have a shared apartment that you can have for guests, so that you don't need to have an extra room in your apartment, but you can have these shared spaces. And I think that is a really nice trend to see, because that will also solve some of the other issues that we have with a lack of housing for the families. And I think these more flexible communities are very interesting, also going forward with having families splitting up and getting back together or in new ways, and that will be very, very important in the future.
Yeah, especially as most part of the housing stock is housing, multifamily, and how do you find that belonging in this certain standardization and in the sharing with others?
Yes.
I think an interesting trend in society in relation to sustainability has to be done with reusing. And probably you see it, and there are incredibly successful online platforms about selling, exchanging, and reusing clothing. And this, I think, is a very interesting trend, because people are saying, I want to use vintage clothing, I want to do this because I know about its impact. And this is also translating to the house. Of course, that to buy an old apartment in a city center is a tremendous opportunity, because it's cost-effective. You know that the investment will go up. But also, you have to do a renovation, and that is when you go to an expert, such as Claire. And I wonder, how do you see this trend, but also how do you see the requirements of the clients when they want to renovate an apartment in an old building? Do they pursue an aesthetic that is true to this, let's say, vintage clothing style, like my vintage apartment? Do they want to make it like it's a completely new apartment? How do you see in this part that this trend expresses itself?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I would love if there would be some building regulation where they would say, in order to decide to build something new, first you have to prove that there are no buildings that could be adapted to suit your needs, so that we can really focus on doubling the amount of renovation for the EU by 2030. We'll see if that happens. But yes, clients coming to me, hasn't changed what I said a few years ago. They come with their Pinterest images. They come with their Pinterest images. They come with their Instagram images, ArchDaily images. You know, it's a fantastic way to show new projects and see what's happening in the architecture world. But what I would love is if we could change the money shot. Instead of being an aesthetic shot, it could be, what were the sustainability practices that were integrated into this building? And so for me, I find myself as a role as an architect, you know, you have all these people, they've come, usually they don't have a ton of money. They've just bought a property. It's the money left over that they have to renovate it, and they really want to achieve their dreams. They want to achieve these aesthetics that they've been thinking about for years and years. They finally have a property they can make their own. How can you help them realize that maybe they should prioritize a sustainability feature that then they will save money over time to then invest in their aesthetic features? But yes, a lot of people, they come with the Pinterest image. That's what they want. It's really hard to make them see that maybe aesthetics is not what they should be focusing on. They should hopefully be focusing on how sustainability can help them financially to then achieve their aesthetic goals.
And what are your kind of, let's say, more common suggestions to your clients to open their eyes into this?
Mostly it's a lot about, you know, indoor climate, just thinking about how are you using your space, especially now that a lot of people are doing work from home. They found that they really liked it during the corona crisis. And so you're going to be spending so much time in your home. How can we actually replace your windows so that they can have natural ventilation, or maybe put in a mechanical ventilation system that will make it more pleasant for you to actually spend so much time in your home? Then the aesthetics can come later. The aesthetics parts that help with the functionality, that help you really love living in your space and draw inspiration for it while you're living there. But really think about more, how much time are you living there? How much time are you spending there? Can you actually take something more from your home. For instance, right now I'm doing a lot of properties which will be used as vacation homes. But how can we actually transform the design so that you're using that to pay back later? You're transforming it into a vacation home that you can rent out, but then that also has a lot of implications on the design, on the aesthetics, and on the sustainability features. So people, they're asking for more out of their home. They want more aesthetically, they want more financially, and they want more sustainability.
Perfect. Well, as part of this more conscious approach that we are having as society, also we care about how we're feeding ourselves, about our healthcare, but sometimes we have no idea about the materials that were used in our construction, and not just from a carbon footprint, also about how they could have an impact, positive or negative, in our health. And I think that this is an important approach that you are taking in Active House, because it's not just about the performance, let's say from a technical point of view, energy, daylight use. It is also about the materials, their certification, and trying to use something that in a way is more, let's say, like as we have organic food, the organic equivalent to buildings. What can you tell us about this aspect of your
in Active House, it's also a non-objective parameter in the sector of environment, but we are calculating CO2 footprint from materials. But in any case, our goal is health of people, firstly, because we are building our houses for us, for people. And after, we should think about what about materials and how it's influenced the nature, and understand the connection between people and nature. And it's rather easy in our approach. It's not super complicated calculations. And the idea of our approach, it's not calculating only. It's a balancing. And it's not possible just to think about one parameter. It should be a connection between all. For this reason, it's just one parameter of whole system. Hope I answer your question, because it's the main idea, balancing, not only calculations.
And how do you think that you mentioned your clients before that it was very hard for them to see this. How do you think that they could connect with this understanding? That doing a comprehensive solution that perhaps at the beginning costs more is something that you will take that value somehow during the life cycle?
It depends what tool do you have to communicate efficiently with the client. And our Active House Radar, really nice tool to start the communication, and even with non-professional person to explain the holistic approach. And I usually use this, and if in any case client don't take care or do not understand, it's my responsibility how include in any case this in the project and realize, because it's my responsibility due how to say ecological agenda and issues.
Perfect.
So it's very strange approach, but in my area it works. Because I know that in Nordic countries, really it's much more easier, because society understands the problem. And you can see around in Copenhagen that everything is done according to sustainable agenda, recycling, everything. But we have another markets. And for example, of course, I back to the issues of Ukraine, and we will have a huge recovery. And my mission to make it green and sustainable, not only by the concrete, and only about the safety, because safety it's not only a concrete box. Safety is our future. It's our clean air, clean earth, and clean water for Ukrainians and for all the people.
That will be a tremendous opportunity to do a proper reconstruction.
I hope for this. I will do my best.
We will support you.
I'm sure.
And Christine, well, when you are a developer who owns thousands of square meters, the life cycle of your properties is crucial, and to manage this can have a tremendous financial gain if you reduce the energy use and do a proper simulation and analysis. But I wonder how this can also be part of the information or the tools that a homeowner can use for the life cycle of their house. You do a lot of this early stage analysis work, I understand, working in these large scale projects, but do you think that there is something that you could take from this that could be actionable by the homeowner?
I'm not really sure I understand the entirety of your question.
I understand that you do a lot of early stage analysis that goes for the architects, developers, so they can take informed decisions about their projects.
Yeah.
And of course, that as a homeowner, you don't have access to this kind of information.
No.
So from your view and your expertise, is there something that you think that could be useful for that end user that often is disconnected from this important part of the process?
Probably yes, and it's probably a shame that we never really, or very seldomly, get to talk to the final client. Most definitely, I think we see a lot of clients. For example, they would like to have a well-insulated house, right? Because that's good for the thermal capacity and for the indoor climate. But maybe they're not aware of that there are different types of insulation. And that is some of the things that we explain to architects and engineers, that it's actually, it does matter what type of insulation that you choose to use for your building. Because there can be a big variation in the climate impact depending on which type of insulation you choose. And I guess that is something that the final homeowner will never really think about. But as you also mentioned early on, like we have bio foods, like ecologic foods, and we have a lot of knowledge about that as we go to the supermarket to choose what type of products that we are choosing to take home, right? As well as we do with, in the Nordics, we have eco-label for a lot of our shampoos or like the products that we use in our everyday life, but we don't have a similar like label for ecological building materials. So I think, yeah, that is definitely something that the final user is not aware of. And then I think there is another also important aspect when it comes to the final users of the buildings. We rarely ask them how they feel about living in this new building and actually taking that information into the consideration of the next designs that we are doing. So what we are trying to suggest to clients is also doing these post-occupancy evaluations of the building design, like asking the user afterwards, well, does it actually meet your needs in terms of indoor climate, daylight, and all these things? And I think that is also something that we should be doing more, and I think we will see more of it in the future because it is getting more and more common in certifications, for example, which is also in huge demand.
Yeah, this technology is helping us that these things are more available, and that before used to be only for experts. Now people general audiences are having a say and can have access to these tools thanks to technology. And these empowered consumers are also looking to ways to customize their house. Of course, sometimes there is not so much that you can do to the building envelope, to the core structure, but perhaps you are closer to how the consumers are really customizing their spaces, and they are looking to do it also in a sustainable way. Before, you were telling me, Lara, about how people are using configurators to do a better use of their space. How do you see this need for customization and the state of that today from your perspective?
Absolutely. At IKEA, we are doing our best to offer tools to our customers to plan out their interior spaces in the virtual realm from home so that you know exactly how things can fit together. And in this way, you're also not necessarily wasting what you're buying because you're targeting exactly what you need for your space. And I see a possibility for doing this with the way that we design residential spaces spaces or whole communities or neighborhoods overall together. And that includes with the circularity topic to really understand how part of making our homes more sustainable is to not waste anything from the buildings that we have, not waste anything from the furniture that we've had in our lives or our families, to enable through services really the ability to refurbish and to repair instead of to have this throwaway mentality. And this is a next generation panel, and I think that's really what the next generation is about, is to have a love and a care for the places they live, the things they own, and to see through these stories of these objects as part of their lives, and that it's our responsibility as companies to help them with the tools to be able to do this. And also referring to living places, I think that this is really the other aspect. We hear a lot about the carbon footprint, and I think that's powerful. But I used to work with VELUX, and I was so happy to be there in the early days when I could understand these conversations, that this was not only about a low footprint, but also about a positive community footprint, to create spaces where your home is not an isolated space where you live. You're not necessarily in a dense high-rise isolated at the same time, but where we can have many people living together, where they can see one another, where they can share, but also have places of quiet and retreat. And I think that's just as important a part of the sustainable home and the ability to create a longevity in our living spaces as anything else.
And well, this is thanks to construction technology and change of mindset of developers. We're seeing more of this, the possibility to customize your house before you buy it, use different configurations, move partitions. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have construction startups who are printing houses. So eventually we can think that in the future, the architectural process will be embedded on an app in which users are going to be able to design between certain parameters their desired home, and it will be printed. But this utopian or dystopian future, we're getting there. But going back to reality, this desire for customization, for a hands-on approach, is not just the high-tech. And I want to ask Henry, because I saw a very interesting presentation about his research side, going to low-income communities in the Global South and seeing these things, these innovations coming out of necessity. In some contexts, you need to do more with less, and all these things are happening, perhaps not in the way that here in Western Europe we are seeing them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, and I think we're jumping very much into a context here, especially in my work that I was doing in relation with a NGO called Techo, who were based in Chile. And I think what I was very, very inspired by is, I mean, a lot of the answers and a lot of the way of thinking is out there. I mean, whether it's through looking at inspiration from local flora and fauna, but also looking at the way that people have adapted and adjusted the way of living in low socioeconomic backgrounds. So working in the informal settlement communities, I was very inspired by the way that you see how you can do so much with so little. The opportunities of seeing a patchwork of architecture, upcycling and using the most out of the materials that they have available. And I think that whole collective action and working together in the co-creation of the architecture of community spaces is really, really interesting to look at, and how we can learn from that kind of way of thinking and start to apply it into even our working environments. And I think actually when it comes to some of the challenges we'll face both environmentally but also socially in the years to come, the rapid increase of rising temperatures, flash floods, and where we do need to be adaptable. I think, again, we can look to a lot of these communities that have adapted and are living in these extreme environments as a way forward for us to progress and have a sort of a long, hard look at ourselves, the way we're designing and why we are designing. So, a lot to learn, and it's a topic and a project which I'm continuing to be inspired by.
And from this experience, is there anything that you can share as something that really caught your attention in terms of applied innovation in low-income housing?
Yeah, I think what we have been working with the community on throughout this process was how we can be a lot more connected also to our process of resource development and creation. So looking at how we don't just see architecture as a silo dwelling, but how we can be a bit more connected to the way that we use architecture as a place to develop resources, to create sort of an alternative way of working in harmony and harnessing the natural environment and merging that with our architecture. So I see that through the resource production, but I also see it through the constant agile design that evolves to the expansion of the family that they live in. You know, many of these communities have to be quite nomadic. So for 6 months, they're in one location, and they have to move all their belongings to another location. So the architecture and design for disassembly is not too dissimilar to the way that we're trying to think about it even at GXN. So many more topics that I think we can dive deep into, but we'll save that for another conversation.
Well, you mentioned the concept of adaptability that sometimes clashes with what we do. Architecture, the building tends to be very rigid. And I think, Claire, here you find, it must be interesting in your work because when you are dealing with your clients for a renovation, there is also a family behind, a family that perhaps is going to be changing over time. How do you incorporate this, like a certain adaptability for the future into your projects?
Yeah, it's definitely, first of all, it's definitely about trying to get to know your clients as well as possible. Trying to break down barriers, try to have them, really tell you how they live in their current house, how they see their life changing on a daily scale, but then also in 5, 10, 20 years, if they want to stay living there, which hopefully you always try to encourage them to think about how will you be living here in the next 10 to 20 years. Are you thinking about retiring here? Do you plan on having an elderly one come and live with you later on? Or have one of your children have a separate apartment within the house? So it really is about trying to help your clients think about the future, if that future will be in that home. And trying to help them see how their design choices now will have an effect on having to renovate again. And also really encouraging them, think about it now so you don't have to invest again in 10 years. And it can actually really help people to, really think about their goals, and it'll help them really be more specific about what they want now if they're thinking about how will it be in 10 to 20 years. It can be really a really beautiful thing to really come into the lives of all these different people and try to make their dreams a reality through design and through helping them make choices within their home.
Perfect. And also this adaptability and vision for this evolving future. Alexander, you were showing me a very interesting project early about reconverting the upper levels of the historical district of Podil in Kiev.
Yep. Yes, now we have a feasibility stage project in Kyiv with a new European Bauhaus from Europe. So I made the calculations, evaluation of the Podil district. It's my favorite district in Kyiv because we have realized already a pilot project of empty house apartments there. And I understood when the work has started that we need more places for not only for refugees, but for future we need to find a solution how to back Ukrainians from Europe to Ukraine. Because today we have nearly 8 million Ukrainians abroad. And how to create the best places for them, sustainable, healthy, so on. And potential of Podil district nearly 60,000 square meters of attic floors, of roofs, dark roofs. It means that nearly 600 families could find sustainable apartments. And now we are working on feasibility stage how to adapt these roofs to our holistic approach of active house. Because we have already realized the project, we have an example, we have again a pilot project which is possible to touch for people, for municipalities, and just do the same. Because today it's very important maybe to go faster if you have a case already. When one team like Living Places team from VELUX, Effect, ArchDaily, they did everything just to repeat, adapt to your local project and do the same, and you solve a lot of problems. So hope we will do this in Kyiv, and I will invite you, and we will make the same debates on these roofs.
This is a very interesting trend because also happens where I live in Berlin, where it's a housing shortage, and under certain conditions you are allowed to build on top of the existing structures, and it's square meters that, let's say, appear out of air, and it's a tremendous opportunity to have affordability in the city center, in a city where this is getting very out of control. And as you showed me, this is also a very viable option, possibility for Kyiv to bring people into the city center and also to improve the sustainability of all these historic buildings.
Yes, because this project could solve a lot of problems because you don't need any infrastructure. Everything is ready. If you need more connection to the environment and nature, we can install more green roofs and people will be connected just 5 levels underground. And it could be, of course, a positive energy district. So we have no problem with new energy from the common grid. So only benefits, just a way how to prove to the local municipalities and society.
No, but I think that this is a tremendous change that is happening because, okay, I think we all agree that renovation to reuse what is existing is the most efficient. It's also a responsibility that we have, but if we look at it from the outside, I think that the most important awards of architecture in Europe and in the world in the last years have gone to architects who are reutilizing buildings, who are taking this decision saying, we don't need to do something new, we just need to fix this.
Yeah.
And sometimes I even think this is a bit counterintuitive with the old way of doing architecture, in which you want to do the singular new building to have that opportunity. But now there is this important change in architecture that I think is very positive. But also to understand that this is not just a desire, but also has a measurable impact. And I want to ask you, Christine, how do you see this? Because again, in the early stage, when people want to take decisions, do we demolish? Do we repurpose? How can we have a, let's say, a better life cycle of the building through this way, taking these decisions?
Exactly, and we've been asked that question actually a couple of times. Like people actually genuinely interested in knowing, what would happen if I tore down this building and build a new one, or what would happen if I rather transformed it into what I need it to be. And we did life cycle assessments for actually 16 different renovation projects, and also the life cycle cost. And in all 16 cases, it was better to renovate rather than to build something new. To meet your needs, and some of the projects were actually transforming attics, and I think those were like really interesting ones because it was square meters that was already there and just waiting to be utilized for something else than just like drying clothes, but it could actually be transformed into quite nice apartments, and it was a really good story in terms of sustainability and also actually in terms of life cycle cost. So also the total cost was lower than if you had to build new ones.
Before we open to questions from the audience, I want to do a last round with a very, let's say, general question, but I think that each of you will be able to answer from your points of view. And I want to ask you, which is the role that design will play in shaping the home of the future? Lara.
Yeah, I love how these conversations that we've had have really bounced back and forth between the topics of personalization, localization, and then standardization and scalability. And this is really a tension that is so difficult to solve. And not only amongst us here, but also in this fantastic World Congress we have, it's been this conversation about how do we get ourselves into more of a process of going back and forth with whoever the homeowner is going to be, with whoever the client is going to be, whoever the customer is going to be, or with the government, to have these conversations where we are going between the solutions that we know work and are scalable and are standardized, and making tweaks and adjustments to really accommodate who you are, what you need, and the parameters we need to stay in for the planet. So for me, the role of design is to, as a profession, become not only more for people, but together with people and more personable. And that the more we do that, the more that we'll have that sense of ownership that I mentioned at the beginning of this panel. And that really that sense of ownership is where we can have care for our homes and care for our place and our planet.
Perfect. Henry.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I'm looking at it both as someone who is obviously living, but in an apartment, and is looking at how and what way I want to live in the future, and yet just trying to reflect a little bit about how that connects with what we talk about at GXN and personal work of how we're designing these buildings of the future. So I think it comes down to also what we're valuing in our homes, what is going to be the desires and requirements that we want to have in our living environments. You know, we have to break away from the realities or the dream of what our parents and our grandparents had with this quarter-acre dream, and understand that we can't live in that same way, and we need to, both as designers, accommodate for smaller living in many places that can evolve to the changing needs, that we are not just thinking about it from a circular side, but also our behavioral interactions, the health and well-being attributes that we talk about, physiological, psychological. So this holistic way of designing in the future, not looking at it in silo, but looking at it very much in harmony. And I think when you bring in a panel of, as an example, when we are designing, we need to have these different perspectives. We can't just look at it from my architectural point of view. We need engineers, we need specialists within renovations, we need specialists within health and well-being. And we need to come together to really find that positive direction that we're going to take in the years to come.
Perfect. Claire.
Yeah, for me, it's really about involving the end user, and not only just involving them, but really listening to them, especially in homes. These homes are what they're going to be living in. We're not the ones that are living in them. And especially now, I think so many homeowners, they already have so many ideas about design. They have their own aesthetic. They have their own ideas. They've been looking and dreaming for years about how they want their home to be. They've been saving up with it. And so I think our job as designers is really to listen to them and try to curate their ideas and strategize their ideas to help them achieve their vision. I think that still now, as architects, sometimes, especially in residential projects, people think, I'm not going to get an architect because then the project's going to cost so much money. And it's really more about how can we change that perception and really show them that architects can actually just help you achieve your vision and help you stay within your budget while achieving that vision.
Yeah, that is usually an important question.
Yeah.
Alexander?
Evidence-based design and evidence-based architecture could be a solution because it could solve a problem but not create it. But it depends on each of us what approach to find for this. For example, I'm happy about Active House because it's very fast, cheap and efficient for me and for my clients. One more conclusion maybe about sustainable buildings, that sustainable buildings is a building which is not built. So it's a back to question about renovation, and maybe one day it will be the law that architects should only work with existing artificial buildings. So think about this, because renovation is a big potential for all of us. And to find a solution in this sphere could lead to great results.
Perfect. And from your engineering window,
Yes.
but who works with architects.
From my engineering perspective, I think the future design, we need to keep in mind the planetary boundary as well as the social foundation. And when I talk about the planetary boundary, I mean we have a budget that we need to stay within, just like we have a household budget at home, we need to stay within. We can also have budgets for our buildings. And there are several methodologies to calculate the budget of a building in terms of CO2 emissions. And we have several ones actually here in Denmark that we are already working with. And I think that is really key. And then not only keeping within the budget for the building, the transformation or the new building that you are trying to achieve, we also need to have the crucial discussion of how we should allocate these budgets. Because in the north, should we even be allowed to have any more emissions? We've had so many. Maybe we should leave some of the emissions that we are left to still emit for the global south, for Ukraine, for somewhere else. And I think that is a crucial discussion on should we allocate these budgets for housing or should we allocate it for hospitals? Because we need to have these discussions at some point because we cannot keep doing what we're doing at the moment.
But I'm hopeful about this because, of course, it's in a different scale, but all these EU laws that are shaping our electronics are really putting a grip on the emissions. And eventually, I think that this kind of thinking will reach to the built environment for sure.
Yeah.
I think that it was a very good conversation to see from your different windows. And actually now I was thinking that all of you together could do an amazing project. I think we have all the specialties that we need for that. And now I want to open the floor for questions from the audience.
Everything is clear.
Here, we will give you the microphone.
Thank you. I'm Flavio, an architect, also a PhD, and I studied homes during my research and also during my practice. I believe that your talk was so interesting because actually with all your points of view you can make the meaning of a home from, well, different angles. And I want to highlight something that probably, I don't know, stayed a little bit underneath, that is the concept of flexibility or adaptability and how it can cope with sustainability, because I mean, it is proved right now that in, well, at least Europe, in cities, we live different lifestyles, we conduct different lifestyles. There is a rise of living alone or, well, different group of people living together in different way than the traditional and normative or legalized way, because, for example, in Italy or in Spain, all the normative is based on the traditional man, woman, two children lifestyle that right now it's almost antiquated. So we live in houses designed by this kind of lifestyle, but we don't conduct mainly, well, I mean, I don't know if you do, but probably the number says also that the majority doesn't conduct this lifestyle. So how can we design with flexibility in mind and sustainability in mind, something that is not even legalized? I mean, I can imagine with materials, with also architecture doing something, but how can I make something flexible if I actually cannot stay in the margin of law?
Henry?
Yeah. Just so I'm aware, were you talking about in terms of the tectonic of the flexibility around internal partitions, the way of designing and changing our space quite quickly? Is that sort of the angle of, yeah, but I think there was a really interesting discussion even on the main stage yesterday with Dr. Rosen and Francis around temporality versus longevity in our architecture. You know, are we designing something that should stand 200, 300 years, that's set in stone, the building material is going to be there and it's not going to move? Or are we designing actually for that topic, that it's okay to be temporary, that it's okay to be able to have building components and sometimes use maybe materials which, components which aren't as sustainable as maybe the timber elements or whatnot. But if we are being able to design for demountability and have that kind of modular and standardization that can adjust to that changing needs, and that can be both from a building tectonic, but all the way down to our smaller scale of our internal spaces and the materials that we use. So I think there are a lot of ways of doing it. I think in many cases we aren't doing that still today, and I think there are a lot of adjustments that we need to do to make the individual user also adjust that. And I think exactly sort of what you're talking at, a scale around the user control is very much on that direction. I don't know if you've got something to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would very much like to add that while you were asking this question, I was thinking about some of these apartments, these developer super dense concrete apartments that have been constructed around Copenhagen, and maybe they were built with this intention that it would be a couple with their children, and then the rents are actually so high that often that's not the case. And who is living there is, instead of this hypothetical family, it's 4 students, university students, who are splitting up the rent then with 4 economies instead. And this is like an unintentional kind of flexibility. But I also think about Kartoffelhuset along the lakes here in Copenhagen, that nowadays it's these old buildings. They were constructed for workers, by workers also. And it used to be, there are these 2-story units, and it used to be that there were 2 families for each level. And now it's 1 family in the whole thing. And our standards for space have just exploded beyond belief. And something I haven't mentioned, but now I'm so excited I get to. I did my PhD actually on sustainable building standards and on Active House. And one of the things that I got to research on was examples such as Leaked Active House in the Hamburg area and Renault Active in Belgium. And this is where they took this typical standard family house in garden cities from the post-war period. And I just want to make reference to this because even if these are single-family homes now and they were renovation projects, incredible, and really to consider human health and well-being. But one of the key aspects really is to understand this garden city concept and the idea that the needs of the people are different today. But maybe in the future we go back to living in garden cities. Maybe we do something like living places. We're living in gardens together, and maybe you see that structure and you think it might have been a single family house, but you're any kind of people. You're single, you're young, you're older, you're also single, you are middle-aged and have a family because we start later. I mean, everything in between. And just to take those existing structures that we have, and thank you so much for bringing that up, Christine. I mean, first and foremost is like, maybe these things weren't designed with us in mind and for the future generation in mind, but that's where design comes in, and we get to be creative about, now we have these structures. How can we turn them into the places that we need? Thank you.
I would like to add.
Please, Alexander.
I would like to add that if you want to be outside the standards, try to work with values, to find right values and to find right principles to reach these values. And maybe the question, what for, will help you a lot. Each time when you want to change something in your project, just ask yourself what for, and you will be impressed about the results. Maybe also, if you start from active house approach, you will find very fast a lot of answers to your questions. Who knows?
And I think an interesting example to look, because I see this happening a lot in Europe, is the multi-generational home. So a whole family through 3 or 4 generations say, let's do a project for ourselves, and at the end they are like somehow like a cooperative, and they decide something that is very special, trying to accommodate different ages. That also is similar to, well, we have always been marveled by these very small houses in Japan, that at the end is the parents giving a subdivision of the plot to the kids, to the next generation, because the land is so expensive, and they end up building something that is super small, but is passing the land and has this expression in architecture. But what you were saying, Lara, I also think now, and this is upcoming, especially in the US, what will happen with all the unused office space that some people are saying this is an opportunity for residential, and how to do that adaptability in these big open floors. That will be something.
I would just love to jump on that and say that if you saw what happened with the hotels during the pandemic when they were empty, and what the government did is they gave homes to the homeless. And this is what happens when you suspend disbelief and you say, what are the needs of the people? What are the places that we have and what can we do with them? I mean, and to think about this in the context of Ukraine in the future, this is, forget US. Ukraine is going to be where the dreams come back through the built environment. Yeah.
We have time for another question from the audience.
Thanks a lot for a really, really interesting panel. Henry, you mentioned the talk with Francis Curie and Professor Rosings, I believe, where you remembered a nice part around temporality. I was very provoked by the beginning of that talk where Professor Rosings started saying that we will leave a footprint no matter what, so we should leave a beautiful footprint. And I can really see this tension throughout the Congress, that architects need something to try and achieve. And now we're talking about building less and trying to leave a smaller footprint. And I can see that some architects are very frustrated about that premise. So what about you, the new generation? Like, what do you see is going to be the mission of architecture if it's not anymore about building bigger, building bolder? What do you feel about this?
Yeah, I can maybe start and then we can share around, or unless you. But yeah, I think I'm extremely passionate about this idea of transformation architecture. It has to be the way forward. We have to see value in our assets that we have and our commodities around the resources from our existing buildings. And it is really alarming, especially here in Denmark, where there's such a contradiction of, ambitious targets by 2030, but yet we're demolishing 1.2 million meters squared of social housing spaces to then build 700,000 meters squared or 60,000 homes. And that is kind of alarming, that we have a lot of materials and resources that we need to harness. We can't be demolishing and sending that off to the waste and scrapyard. So as a designer progressing, starting my journey off here, it is the only way I really see a big and quick change is if we're having that paradox between needing to create housing and accommodation for our increased urban living, but we need to combine and look at clever ways in which we can see that current assets and the value in our building industry and use smart thinking and transformative thinking to solve both issues at the same time.
Any of you would like to comment?
Yeah, I think as architects, we really have an opportunity to diversify our services. I've had a great opportunity to not finish my work with the client at the end of the architecture project, but then continue my work with them to work on the usage of the building, trying to help them build a business model, trying to implement sustainability tactics into their business plan. So really working on how can we extend our services, not only in the actionable renovation, the actionable building of the building, but how can you actually use your ideas as a designer, as an architect, to help other services that can be put into public policy, can be put into creating, businesses or into community networks, but how can you extend your services not only in construction, but also using all of your design knowledge to become more strategic?
Christine?
I think what is also really important in the future is not doing like business as usual consulting, but perhaps even insulting, like really asking the the right questions to the clients, do you really need to build that? Like, do you really need to do this? And I think we have a huge role to play in giving like all this newest information to our clients and really trying to push them in a more sustainable direction.
Shortly, solve the problems, not create. This is a mission.
And what I want to share from this perspective that this model will change, and for sure that the architecture profession is going to go through a big impact. Technology will help us a lot and will free our time. And I'm very happy to see that as part of this new generation of architects, many are entering into technology, trying to scale architecture, make it more affordable, and perhaps pursuing models that are more closer to the client and in different ways. And I'm very happy to see that happening, that architects are understanding it's not just about pursuing the race for the singular building. There are endless ways in which architectural knowledge can help people. And thanks to the internet, it's easier to reach. So we have reached the end of our panel, and again, I go very excited after learning from your different perspectives and seeing again this potential. I think we touched on all the aspects of the building, from the early stage, the schematic design, the execution, the construction, the life cycle. So at least for me, a tremendous learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.